remedy is hold fast to the traditions which you have learned from us.
And I appreciate that sentimentality, and certainly that's something that we try to practice in our lives as best as we can. But let me ask you this, Mr. Gibson. One of your books, which, again, ladies and gentlemen, is available for purchase, autographed, The Enemy is Still Here. Who is precisely the enemy? I mean, if we're going to go and confront these people intellectually, with our ideas, who is the enemy? Is it an abstract force, or is it a specific group of people that we can readily identify?
It's the whole government of the church in Rome. You might find an occasional Catholic somewhere outside of Rome, but they're in complete control in Rome. And they are spreading their heresies, and they are canonizing their devotees by the thousands, and without proper confirmation or anything of the sort. They start with the bit in their teeth, and they think this is wonderful, we have freedom. Well, our freedom is there to obey the proper authority, God. And if we don't, there's an awful penalty attached to it. These people don't seem to worry about the penalty. They may have kidded themselves into thinking there is no hereafter.
Mr. Gibson, let me ask you a question. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial or give the impression that I'm trying to be sensationalist here. But there was talk, for instance, that John Paul I was murdered by this group of heretics and apostates. What are your feelings on John Paul I and his death?
Well, he wasn't so great either. He had gone heretical. But see, they had a bank which Pius X started up in Venice, and the Vatican Bank sank it. It was the equivalent of a credit union, and nobody in Venice was in the pocket or of the bankers. They would support each other, and this thing ran very well. And Marcinkus, I believe, the archbishop, the one they call the guerrilla, the guy from Chicago, or Cicero, rather, which, of course, is across the street from Chicago in Al Capone territory. And they called him the guerrilla because he was a large fellow. And he was engaged in the Vatican Bank, and he sank this credit union in Venice. And down came the cardinal from Venice, and they had blood in his eye to get rid of the people to get rid of his bank. And coincidentally, they were doing a lot of other things, too. And I'm sure they got rid of him. In fact, his body was discovered, around 7 a.m., and the undertakers had been waiting in the street for the call since 5 a.m. Things like that, which showed up in David Yallop's book, which I think targets it pretty well. It was a financial deal with him, more than a doctrinal thing.
So he was just part of the same corrupt system and just became a victim of it, I guess, sort of like a mafia don who, is caught in the conspiracies of other mafia dons, in a sense.
Right.
Well, now, when we talk about enemies of the church, obviously we have to come to some conclusions about those who are not of the Christian faith at all, and those who hold the Christian faith in utter contempt. Notably, of course, we know that the Muslims enslaved Christians for years and have suppressed Christians. And of course, there's a very great hostility against Christianity among particularly secular Jews. I mean, do you see these threats coming at us from outside the faith as dangerous as what's going on inside the faith?
Well, they have their people inside doing their work. A good many of these people were in Rome are Freemasons, which is grounds for ejection, excommunication. You join the Freemasons, you're out of the church. And so, therefore, John 23rd was not eligible to be a pope. He was a Freemason. And Paul VI, you could say the same.
Well, in talking about the Freemasons, who is at the core of the Freemason leadership, who basically are giving the marching orders here?
Well, that's one of those things. You don't find out who they are. It's pretty hard to pin them down.
Well, one thing that you said, Mr. Gibson, that I agree wholeheartedly with is that these people, these antichrists, people who hate Christianity, have their agents within the church, which I think goes back to something that we were talking about earlier, at least that I was referencing earlier. Do you think that there's a correlation there in part of a greater plan? Do you think that the same people who are actively engaged in the attempted destruction of the church and the faith, do you think these are the same people who are actively infiltrating our government and academia, Hollywood, etc.?
Yes.
One-word answer, yes, and so do I. Well, that being said, we've got time for one more segment with Hutton Gibson. We're about to come up on another commercial break. It seems as though the commercial breaks always come upon us a little bit faster when we're in the midst of a riveting interview with a esteemed guest. But we are going to take that break, and we will return and conclude our interview with Hutton Gibson of HuttonGibson.com right after this. I'm James Edwards. Bill Rowland will be back with me in just a moment.
Every night, every day, Lord. Don't go away. The Political Cesspool guys will be back right after these messages.
We gotta get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do, we gotta get out of this place. Girl, there's a better life for me. If I didn't tell her I didn't.
Welcome back. To get on the Political Cesspool, call us on James's dime, toll free at 1-866-986-6397. And here's the host of the Political Cesspool, James Edwards.
Welcome back to the show, the final segment of tonight's second hour. We still have an hour to go this evening, although this will be our last segment with Hutton Gibson, and we are very, again, pleased and honored to have him with us tonight. Mr. Gibson, as I said in the previous segment, or excuse me, in the first hour of tonight's show, those who best understand the strength of a tide in a nation are those with the courage to swim against it. And I applaud you and salute you for all that you've done with your life, speaking out on controversial matters and telling the truth in love. I can only hope that I will live a life as accomplished as yours has been. And I certainly appreciate the viewpoints that you've shared with us thus far on the church. These are viewpoints that I certainly agree with to a large degree.